Under the vast Arizona sky, where the land burned gold beneath the dying sun, a lone cowboy rode with dust curling behind his horse's hooves. The year was 1879, and the West was still wild, half tamed by settlers and half ruled by the wind, by the silence of mesas, and by the ghosts of the old Apache trails. Every man who crossed these lands carried his past like a shadow, never gone, only waiting to catch up. And tonight, as the horizon flamed red, the cowboy's past seemed closer than ever. He wasn't much older than 30, his face burned by years of sun and grit. Folks in Dry Creek called him the Quiet One, because he didn't talk more than he had to. He'd worked cattle for the McAllister Ranch most of his life, earning little more than dust and scars. But it was the only life he knew. His horse, a gray Mustang named Clay, was his closest friend. Stubborn, loyal, and as weathered as his rider. They had been together through cattle drives, prairie storms, and skirmishes that the law pretended not to see. Out here, a man didn't need much. Just a good horse and a reason to keep going. That evening, the trail was unusually silent. No cicadas, no wind sighing through the sage. The cowboy pulled on the reins, slowing Clay to a walk. He sensed it, the uneasy quiet that told him something was wrong. He scanned the horizon. To the north, the land sloped toward a dry creek bed that shimmered faintly under the setting sun. And then he saw it, movement among the rocks, small, unsteady, human. He dismounted, keeping one hand on his revolver. The figure stumbled forward. A woman. Her steps dragging as though the earth itself pulled at her. Her dress, made of soft deer hide, was torn and dust-stained. Her long black hair, once braided, now hung loose and tangled. But what struck him most were her eyes, dark, fierce, and full of pain. An Apache woman. And she was wounded. She tried to speak, but only a rasp came out. Her left arm was wrapped in blood-soaked cloth, and she was limping badly. The cowboy hesitated. He'd seen enough blood between settlers and Apaches to know that trust was a rare thing. Many men in town would have left her to die, or worse. But something in her eyes stopped him. Fear, yes, but also pride. She wasn't begging for her life. She was fighting to keep it. He dropped his gun to the ground, slowly raised his hands to show peace, and said softly, "I ain't here to hurt you." His voice carried a calm that surprised even him. She stared at him, eyes narrowed, ready to flee or strike if he made a wrong move. Then her knees buckled and she fell. He caught her before she hit the ground. Her skin was burning with fever. The bullet wound in her shoulder looked days old. Without thinking, he tore off a strip from his saddle blanket and pressed it to the wound. She flinched but didn't cry out. The cowboy looked at her horse, or what was left of it, a bay lying dead a few yards away, arrows still jutting from its side. Whatever had happened, she had survived something bad, and she wasn't far from dying if he didn't do something. "Easy now," he whispered. "You'll make it. I'll get you help." But there was no help for miles. Only dust, rocks, and the sound of his heartbeat in the quiet. He knew the closest settlement, Dry Creek, was half a day's ride, and bringing an Apache woman there would only end in trouble. The folks didn't take kindly to her kind. He looked at his horse, then at her. There was no other way. He lifted her carefully and set her on Clay's back. The Mustang shifted, uneasy under the extra weight, but stilled when the cowboy stroked its neck. "You're a good one, boy," he said quietly. Then, without another thought, he began walking, leading the horse through the darkening desert. Every step stirred up memories he'd rather forget. The raids, the broken treaties, the faces of men who thought the West was theirs for the taking. He remembered the first time he'd seen an Apache camp, smoke rising in the dawn, children laughing near the river, warriors watching from the cliffs. That was before the army came. Before everything turned to ash, night fell. The stars came out sharp and cold. The woman stirred once or twice, whispering something in her tongue that he didn't understand. When they finally reached a cluster of rocks that offered shelter, he stopped. He built a small fire, gave her water, and watched her breathe. Her face softened in the flickering light. Young, maybe 20, with the kind of strength born from a hard land. He wondered who she was before all this. A hunter's daughter? A wife, someone's sister? He'd never know unless she lived through the night. He dozed off, leaning against a rock, hand resting near his holster out of habit. The fire burned low. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. When he woke again, the horizon was gray with dawn. The woman was gone. His heart jolted. He looked around. Tracks led away from the fire, light and hurried. She couldn't have gone far, not in her condition. He grabbed his hat, ready to follow, but stopped when he saw Clay. His horse was standing still, reins hanging loose. Around his neck was a string of beads, red and white, woven with care. And lying beside the fire was an arrow, black-feathered, with markings only the Apache used. A warning or a message, maybe both, he cursed under his breath. If she'd made it back to her people, then he was in danger. No Apache would believe a white man had given one of their own his horse out of mercy. They'd see it as theft or deceit. He knew stories of men who wandered too close to Apache territory and never came back. Still, he couldn't bring himself to leave. He packed his few things and followed her tracks, careful and slow. The desert stretched before him, empty, silent, endless. But something kept him going. Maybe it was guilt. Maybe it was the memory of her eyes. He'd done the right thing, he told himself. But in the West, the right thing often had a price. By midday, the sun was burning high, and the air shimmered with heat. Then he saw them, figures moving on the ridge ahead. 5, maybe 6 riders. Their paint glimmered in the sunlight, and their lances caught the wind. Apache warriors. The cowboy froze. He could feel Clay tense behind him. He raised his hands slowly, the way he had before, showing he carried no gun in reach. The riders spread out in a half circle, silent as shadows. One of them dismounted, a tall man with eagle feathers braided into his hair and eyes that cut like obsidian. He said something sharp in his language. The cowboy didn't answer. He couldn't. Then the woman stepped forward from behind them. She was standing now, her arms still bandaged, her face calm but unreadable. The warriors turned to her, waiting for her word. She spoke softly, her voice carrying through the still air. The leader's expression changed, just a flicker, but it was enough. He lowered his weapon. The cowboy exhaled, barely daring to move. The woman walked toward him slowly, her gaze never leaving his. She stopped a few feet away, studying him. Then she said in halting English, "You gave your horse." "To me," he nodded. "You needed it more than I did." She looked at Clay, then back at him. "My people will not forget." Her tone was strange, not gratitude, not yet forgiveness. Something deeper. Then she turned to her people and spoke again in her tongue. The warriors began to move, silent and swift, disappearing back toward the hills. The woman lingered one last moment, her eyes reflecting something the cowboy couldn't name. Respect, perhaps, or sorrow. Then she followed them. He stood there alone again under the blazing sun. The wind shifted, carrying the faint scent of smoke and sage. He thought it was over. He thought he'd never see her again. But later that night, as the stars blinked over the desert, he saw firelight flicker in the distance, far out near the ridgeline. And a sound echoed faintly on the wind. The sound of hooves approaching fast. He reached for his revolver, then stopped, because this time it wasn't fear he felt. It was something else. Something that whispered that his act of kindness had only just begun to change his fate. The wind had grown colder that night. The desert no longer looked empty. It seemed alive, whispering with secrets older than any man could remember. The cowboy stood near the dying fire, listening to the faint rhythm of hooves somewhere beyond the ridge. Clay, his horse, lifted his head and snorted softly. Something, or someone, was coming. He squinted toward the horizon, hand resting near his revolver, though he didn't draw it. Not yet. The orange glow he had seen earlier flickered again, brighter this time. It wasn't a campfire anymore. It looked like several torches moving in the dark, steady and deliberate. Riders. And they were heading straight toward him. His pulse quickened. Maybe they were her people, returning to settle something unfinished. He didn't know what she'd told them, whether she'd spoken truth or twisted it to her people's justice. Out here, a misunderstanding could be the end of a man. He thought of leaving, of riding south under the stars, but something inside him kept him rooted. A man didn't run from what he couldn't escape. As the riders came closer, the sound of their horses rolled across the desert like distant thunder. He could see them now. 4 men, faces painted, moving in silence. Their horses were lean and fast, their movements precise. One carried a torch. Another had a bow resting across his knees. They stopped a few paces from him. None spoke at first. Only the crackle of the torch filled the space between them. Then one of the men dismounted. It wasn't the tall warrior from before, but another, broad-shouldered with a heavy stare that felt like it could see through bone. The cowboy kept still, waiting. Finally, the man spoke in broken English. "You come," he said, pointing toward the hills. Now, the cowboy hesitated. "What for?" The warrior's expression didn't change. "Our chief wants you." The cowboy looked toward Clay, then back at them. He knew refusal wasn't an option. "All right," he said quietly. "Lead the way." He mounted his horse and followed them through the night. The torches lit a path up through narrow canyons where the rock walls glowed red under the firelight. The silence between them was thick, heavy with things neither side could say. After an hour, they came to a small valley hidden between cliffs. Smoke rose from campfires, and the faint murmur of voices carried through the still air. He'd never seen an Apache camp this close before. Children watched from the shadows of their lodges, eyes wide and curious. Women turned from the fires, some whispering, others frowning. Warriors stood at the edges, weapons close but not drawn. The cowboy felt every gaze on him as he dismounted. One of the men gestured for him to wait, then disappeared into the largest lodge. Clay nudged his shoulder softly, uneasy. "Easy, boy," the cowboy murmured. "Ain't no sense in showing fear." But inside his chest felt tight. He didn't know if he'd leave this valley alive. A moment later, the tall warrior he had seen before stepped out of the lodge. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with quiet authority. Beside him stood the woman, the same Apache he had saved. Her arm was still wrapped in cloth, though now cleaner, bound with care. Her hair had been rebraided, and her bearing was proud again, strong. The tall warrior spoke first. "My sister says you helped her," he said. His English was clearer than the others. "That you gave your horse when she was hurt." The cowboy nodded slowly. "That's right." The warrior studied him for a long moment. "Why?" It was a fair question, and one the cowboy didn't have an easy answer for. He thought about the dust, the blood, the silence of that sunset. He thought about all the hate men had built between their two worlds. "Because she was dying," he said simply. "And I could help." The warrior didn't move. His gaze shifted to the woman, who said something softly in Apache. Whatever it was, it made the man's expression harden, but he gave a slow nod. "You will come inside," the warrior said finally. "You will speak to the chief." Inside the lodge, the air was thick with the scent of smoke and herbs. The chief sat near the center, wrapped in a blanket of woven patterns. His face was old, carved with years of sun and memory. His eyes, though dim with age, were sharp. The cowboy felt them settle on him like weight. The woman stood beside her brother, translating when needed. The chief listened as she spoke, her voice calm but filled with emotion. When she finished, the old man looked at the cowboy for a long, silent moment. Then he said something that she translated softly. "You gave what a man does not give easily. His horse, his strength, his way home. In our law that means something." The cowboy frowned slightly. "What does it mean?" The woman hesitated before answering. "It means you are in our debt and we in yours. A bond is made when life is given." The words hung in the air, strange and heavy. The cowboy didn't understand all their ways, but he could feel the weight of it. "I didn't do it for a bond," he said. "I just couldn't let her die." The chief spoke again, his tone firm. "Kindness changes a man's path. You cannot choose what follows." The cowboy felt a chill crawl up his spine. He wasn't sure if that was a blessing or a warning. After that, they led him back outside. The camp had grown quieter, though eyes still followed him. The woman walked a few steps behind, silent until they reached the edge of the firelight. Then she spoke, her voice low. "My brother thinks you are a fool," she said. "He says white men do not give without wanting something in return." "And what do you think?" he asked. She looked at him for a long time before answering. "I think you are not like the others, but that may not save you." He wanted to ask what she meant, but before he could, her brother called her name and she turned away. The cowboy watched her disappear into the shadows of the camp, her figure blending into the firelight and smoke. He was given a small tent near the edge of the valley. Two young warriors kept watch nearby, not quite guards, but close enough. He didn't sleep much that night. The wind whispered through the canyons, carrying sounds of drums and low voices. He thought about the chief's words, about the strange bond he hadn't meant to make. Out here, even kindness had a price. When dawn broke, the camp stirred to life. He saw men riding out with bows and rifles, women tending fires, children playing near the stream that wound through the valley. For a moment, it almost felt peaceful, but the peace didn't last. By midday, a scout returned, riding hard, shouting words that made the camp tense instantly. The warrior beside the cowboy stiffened, his hand going to his weapon. The woman appeared again, speaking quickly with her brother and the chief. The cowboy couldn't understand, but he could read the fear in their eyes. Finally, she turned to him. "Soldiers," she said. "Coming from the east." His stomach tightened. The U.S. Army had been moving through these parts for weeks, hunting for any remaining Apache bands. If they found this camp, it would end in blood. He met her gaze. "You have to move." Hide in the canyons before they see the smoke. She shook her head. We cannot leave so fast. The old and the children. There are too many. He looked around, at the faces of people who would be caught between the soldiers' rifles and the stone walls of this valley. For all the talk of right and wrong, of law and order, he knew how it would go. The army would not ask questions. They never did. Let me go, he said quickly. I'll ride out and see how close they are. Maybe I can slow them down. Her brother stepped forward, eyes narrowing. You would warn us? The cowboy met his stare. You don't have to trust me. But if those soldiers see your camp, they'll kill everyone here. The chief raised his hand, silencing the argument. After a tense pause, he nodded. Go, he said through his translator. If your heart speaks truth, then the wind will guide you back. Without wasting another word, the cowboy saddled Clay. The horse tossed his head, eager to run. The woman approached, holding something in her hand. A leather strap woven with beads, the same red and white pattern she had left before. Take this, she said. It will tell my people you are under my word. He took it, fastening it around his wrist. I'll be back before nightfall, he promised. Then he rode out, the valley shrinking behind him as he crossed into the open desert. The sun beat down hard, the air heavy with heat and silence. Somewhere ahead he knew soldiers were coming, men who wouldn't understand what he was trying to do. He urged Clay faster, scanning the horizon for dust. After an hour he saw it, a faint line of movement near the hills. Cavalry, maybe 20 riders strong. His throat went dry. They were closer than he'd feared. He pulled up behind a rise, watching. The lead officer held a spyglass, scanning the land. If they caught even a trace of the Apache fires, it would all be over. The cowboy's mind raced. He could try to mislead them, draw them off. But how long could one man trick a company of soldiers? The officer turned suddenly, pointing toward the distant ridge, the very direction of the hidden camp. The cowboy's heart dropped. He knew then what he had to do. He reached for his rifle, checked the chamber, and drew a steady breath. The West had always demanded choices no man should have to make. But this one would decide whether an entire tribe lived or died. He kicked Clay into motion, dust rising behind them as they charged toward the soldiers. And in that instant, under the burning sun, the cowboy stopped being a bystander to the land's cruelty. He became part of its story. The thunder of hooves pounded against the hard desert floor as the cowboy rode toward the line of soldiers. Dust and sunlight blurred together until the world became nothing but motion. The wind tore at his coat, the smell of sand and sweat filling his lungs. His heart beat hard in his chest, not just from fear but from the knowledge that what he was about to do could brand him an enemy to his own kind. Yet something deeper pushed him forward. The memory of the wounded woman's eyes, the sound of her people's quiet trust. He slowed Clay to a trot when he came within shouting distance. The soldiers spotted him instantly. Rifles lifted, boots shifted, horses snorted uneasily. The officer in front, tall, lean, his uniform still crisp despite the dust, raised a hand. "Hold your fire!" he called out. The cowboy stopped a few yards away, raising his hand slightly. "Don't shoot!" "I come with a warning," he said, his voice rough from the ride. The officer eyed him with suspicion. "Who are you?" "Name doesn't matter," the cowboy said. "What matters is there's an Apache camp not far west of here. Women, old folks, kids, you don't want to do what you're about to do." The officer's jaw tightened. "You've seen them?" "I have," the cowboy said. "They're moving, not fighting. Let them go. Ain't no reason for blood." The officer exchanged glances with his men. "You sound like you've gone soft," he said finally. "You aiding them, cowboy?" The question hung in the air like a noose. The cowboy hesitated just long enough for the soldiers to start murmuring. He could see it in their faces, the same kind of hate that had burned through these lands for years. "I'm trying to stop another war," he said slowly. "There's been enough killing." The officer dismounted, his boots crunching in the dust as he walked closer. "You think you can tell the U.S. cavalry what to do?" he asked. His voice was calm, but there was danger under it. "Those people have raided our settlers, burned homes. You expect me to ride away?" The cowboy met his gaze. "Not all of them are fighters. You go in there with guns, you'll be shooting at families." The officer studied him for a long time. Then with a cold smile, he said, "Step aside, cowboy. You're in our way." The cowboy knew he couldn't stop 20 men with a single rifle. Still, he didn't move. "I can't let you do this," he said, his hand resting lightly on Clay's reins. The officer's eyes hardened. "Then you've chosen your side." The silence that followed was heavy enough to break the air. The cowboy could hear the horses shifting, the faint click of rifle bolts. He knew he couldn't win, not like this. He needed time. "Listen," he said quickly, his voice steady but low. "If you go straight west, you'll hit a canyon. It's narrow and steep. You'll lose half your men before you find anyone. Go north instead. You'll see their trail if they moved. Don't ride into a trap." The officer paused, studying him again. The cowboy could see the doubt flicker in his eyes. He hoped it would be enough to buy a few precious hours. Finally, the officer nodded to one of his lieutenants. "We'll scout north first," he said. Then, turning back to the cowboy, he added, "If I find out you lied to me, I'll hang you myself." The cowboy didn't answer. He just tipped his hat slightly, then rode off in the opposite direction. The soldiers turned north, the sound of their hooves fading slowly behind him. When the noise finally vanished into the wind, he let out the breath he'd been holding. He'd bought time, but not much. The army would realize soon enough that he'd led them wrong. He needed to warn the Apaches before it was too late. He rode hard, cutting back through the scrub and rock, following the same trail that had led him to their hidden valley. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that danced across the sand. Every minute counted now. By the time he reached the outer cliffs, dusk was falling. Smoke from the campfires still rose faintly into the sky. He whistled softly, a sound the woman might recognize. After a moment, a shape appeared among the rocks. It was her. She looked startled when she saw him, then wary. "You came back," she said. "They're coming," he told her quickly. "The soldiers. I turned them north for now, but they'll figure it out soon." Her face grew pale in the fading light. "We can't move fast enough." "Then you'll need to hide," he said. "There's a cave near the southern ridge. Big enough for the old ones and the children. The rest can scatter through the hills." She nodded, already turning to run back to camp. The cowboy followed. The moment they entered, the quiet hum of the place had vanished. People were packing, horses being saddled, voices rising in hurried whispers. Her brother, the tall warrior, was giving orders, his expression grim. When he saw the cowboy, he frowned. "You came back," he said sharply. "Why?" "Because they're coming," the cowboy said. "You don't have long," the warrior's jaw clenched. "We can fight. You can die," the cowboy said. "And so will the children." For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the woman stepped between them. "He's right," she said quietly. "We hide now. We fight later when we choose the ground." Her brother stared at her, then finally nodded. "Go," he said to the others. "Move." Within minutes, the camp burst into motion. Blankets were bundled, fires kicked out, and small groups began slipping into the canyons. The cowboy helped where he could, lifting supplies, guiding a frightened horse, keeping his eyes on the ridges for any sign of dust. When the last of the group had moved toward the caves, only the woman, her brother, and a handful of warriors remained. They would cover the retreat. The woman turned to the cowboy. "You should go," she said. "If the soldiers find you with us, they'll kill you." He shook his head. "I'm staying. I started this. I'll see it through." Her brother didn't like it, but there wasn't time to argue. He handed the cowboy a rifle and pointed toward a ridge overlooking the valley. "If they come, shoot once." "We'll know." The cowboy climbed the ridge as the stars began to show. The desert below was silent again, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He lay flat against the rock, watching the horizon. Hours passed. The cold crept in. The moon rose, pale and thin, casting long silver lines over the sand. And then he saw it, dust again. Riders. The soldiers had found their trail. He raised the rifle and fired once into the air. The shot echoed through the night. In the valley below, he saw movement, shadows slipping deeper into the canyons. He stayed on the ridge, watching as the soldiers advanced. They were cautious now, spreading wide, rifles ready. The officer was in front again, his face hard and set. The cowboy knew the man wouldn't turn back a second time. The first shots came not from him, but from the far side of the canyon. A handful of warriors opened fire from the rocks, sending echoes bouncing through the cliffs. The soldiers returned fire instantly, flashes lighting up the dark. The noise rolled like thunder, sharp and angry. The cowboy could see the chaos unfold. Horses rearing, men shouting, bullets sparking against stone. He fired a few shots to draw their attention, hoping to pull them away from where the families were hiding. For a moment it worked, but then the soldiers began to flank, moving fast, disciplined. He heard a cry behind him and turned to see the woman climbing up the ridge, her brother close behind. "You shouldn't be here," he shouted. "We can't leave you," she called back. A bullet struck the rock near her foot, sending shards of stone flying. She ducked beside him, breath ragged, eyes flashing with fear and defiance. Her brother knelt beside them, firing down the slope. The gunfire lit the night like lightning. The cowboy's rifle jammed. He cursed under his breath, working to clear it. The officer's voice rang out below, shouting orders. The soldiers were advancing inch by inch. The sound of the woman's brother's rifle cracked beside him, steady and fierce. Then there was a flash, a shout, and the warrior fell back, hit. The woman screamed his name, dropping to her knees. The cowboy caught her arm, pulling her down behind cover. "We have to move," he said, but she shook her head, clutching her brother's hand. The warrior's eyes opened, dim with pain. "Go," he whispered. "Protect them." Then his head fell back and the light in his eyes faded. The cowboy felt the world tilt around them, the gunfire, the shouts, the dust. He grabbed her wrist. "He bought you time," he said roughly. "Don't waste it." She hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. Together they slipped down the backside of the ridge, keeping low. The canyon below glowed faintly with firelight. The soldiers were pressing forward, but the main Apache group had vanished into the cliffs. The cowboy and the woman ran through the darkness, hearts pounding, until the sounds of battle grew distant. They didn't stop until they reached the mouth of the cave where the children and elders hid. Inside, the air was heavy with silence and fear. She sank to her knees, trembling. The cowboy stood near the entrance, staring out at the flickering horizon. Smoke rose faintly in the distance, too close for comfort. He knew the soldiers would come again, and next time they wouldn't stop until every last Apache was gone. The woman looked up at him, her face streaked with tears and dust. "He died for them," she said softly. The cowboy nodded, his voice low. "And we're not done yet." Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of gunpowder and smoke. The desert had gone quiet again, but it wasn't peace. It was the quiet before something worse. He tightened his grip on his rifle and glanced toward the dark horizon, knowing this was far from over. The night might have spared them once, but the dawn would bring reckoning, and when it came, he'd have to choose again which world he truly belonged to. The night pressed on, thick with silence, as the cowboy and the woman crouched near the entrance of the cave. Inside, the elders and children huddled close, eyes wide and terrified, listening to the faint but unmistakable sounds of horses and shouts from far below. The canyon walls seemed to close in around them, carrying every sound and echoing every footfall. Dust fell from the ceiling in tiny clouds, disturbed by the shifting of bodies. The woman's hand trembled in his, and for a moment he could feel the weight of the responsibility settle like a stone in his chest. He wasn't just keeping himself alive anymore. He was guarding the lives of an entire people. He peeked through a narrow slit between the rocks, scanning the valley below. The soldiers had moved cautiously but steadily. Their torches flickered like fireflies in the distance, but the desert was a maze of shadows, perfect for hiding if you knew the terrain. The cowboy studied the land, memorizing every ridge, every fold where the soldiers might stumble or the Apaches could strike from cover. Time was against them. Every second, the army drew closer. The woman leaned against the rock beside him, whispering in her language, translating her thoughts into hurried gestures. She was alert, her senses honed by years in the desert. She pointed to a narrow path winding down the cliffside. "If they see us, we can slip to the creek. It will lead us north, through the canyon walls. They won't follow easily," she said. The cowboy nodded, his mind racing. "We'll need a distraction, something to pull them away long enough for the rest to escape." She studied him, her dark eyes gleaming with determination. "I can do it," she said. "But it will be dangerous." Very dangerous. He felt a chill as he realized the truth in her words. She was offering herself as a decoy. "No," he said sharply. "I won't let you—" "Then we'll both die," she interrupted, cutting him off. "I know the land. I know the paths they do not see. You may not survive the fight if we do nothing." He clenched his jaw, realizing she was right. They didn't have the numbers to fight. They didn't have the firepower. But with strategy, with cunning, they might survive. "All right," he said finally. "We'll do it your way, but we do this together." The plan formed quickly. She would lead a small group of warriors and the stronger men along the hidden path, drawing the soldiers away from the main camp. He would stay behind on the ridge, using his rifle to hold the enemy's attention, buying them time. The elders and children would remain in the cave hidden, ready to move when the coast was clear. Moonlight barely touched the rocks as they moved. The woman's group slipped silently down the canyon path, her brother at their rear keeping watch. The cowboy stayed atop the ridge, Clay tense beneath him, muscles coiled like springs. He could see the soldiers below now, their torches closer, their movements deliberate. Every footstep, every horse snort echoed in the canyon, making him grip the rifle tighter. Hours passed. The wind carried the faint scent of smoke from the distant fires, and the soldiers' voices drifted upward in low, cautious commands. The cowboy fired a single warning shot, the report sharp against the silence of the night. Immediately, a few soldiers turned, scanning the cliffs, eyes narrowing. He fired again, carefully, drawing their attention to the ridge. A small cloud of dust kicked up near his position, and he ducked instinctively as the soldiers returned fire. The bullet struck the rock around him, splinters flying. Clay whinnied softly, uneasy but steady. From the canyon below, he heard movement. The woman and her small group executing their diversion. A shout, low and fierce, echoed through the rocks, followed by the sound of arrows striking distant horses. One of the soldiers swore loudly, spurring his mount forward. The cowboy fired another shot, pulling attention upward as planned. The soldiers began to split, some pursuing the decoy, others holding the ridge. The tension mounted, every heartbeat a drum in his ears. He knew the soldiers would regroup, would realize the trick soon enough. And when they did, there would be nowhere left to hide. Suddenly, a bullet struck the rock near his shoulder, sending him sprawling onto the stone. Clay reared, kicking up dust, but he calmed the horse with a firm touch. He crawled forward, checking the valley below. The soldiers had started to form a line, moving toward the canyon where the decoy had gone. His chest pounded, adrenaline burning through his veins. He had only minutes, maybe seconds, to make the next move. Then came the sound he had feared most. Horses returning from the main camp. The soldiers had discovered the hidden families. Panic surged through him. He fired again, hoping to delay them, but the canyon was too deep, too twisted for him to hold them all at bay. Inside the cave, the elders and children stirred nervously. The woman's plan had given them time, but not enough. He could feel the weight of their fear pressing against him, tightening like a noose. He had promised them protection, and now every second threatened to unravel that promise. He heard her shout from the rocks above. Her voice carried through the canyon, loud and clear. "Over here, this way!" "Follow the sound." The soldiers faltered for a moment, turning toward the noise. Arrows flew from above, striking one of the pursuing men. The cowboy seized the chance, firing again, sending another into the dirt. The decoy worked, partially. The soldiers hesitated, unsure which way to follow. But the main group had reached the canyon's edge and were starting to scramble toward safety. The cowboy's eyes darted toward the creek below. If they made it there, they could vanish into the maze of the desert walls. A sudden shout froze him. One of the soldiers had broken away from the main line and was climbing a small rise, rifle raised, heading straight for the cave. His heart leapt into his throat. The children were still inside. They couldn't fight. They couldn't hide if he failed. He fired, the bullet striking the ground just in front of the man. The soldier stopped, eyes wide, realizing he had been spotted. But there were too many soldiers, and too few of them left to stop the onslaught. The cavalry spread like a storm across the canyon floor, their horses kicking up clouds of dust, hooves echoing against the rock walls. The woman's group was nearly at the creek. He could see the faint glimmer of water under the moonlight, a lifeline for those fleeing. But the soldiers weren't far behind. Every step counted. Every second he held them back could mean life or death for the families hidden in the cave. Another volley of rifle fire rang out from the valley floor. He ducked, rolling behind a boulder. Clay pressed close. He could feel the horse's tension matching his own. The desert, once quiet, had become a battlefield. The faint light of torches and the reflection of moonlight on rifles created shadows that twisted and danced, making the enemy seem larger, more menacing than they were. The woman glanced back briefly, her face pale but determined. "Go, don't stop! The children, protect them!" she shouted. Then she vanished into the night, leading the remaining warriors along the hidden path. The cowboy exhaled sharply. He had only a few minutes left before the soldiers realized the deception. He fired again, picking off one man aiming for the cave, then ducked low as bullets ricocheted off rock around him. Each shot brought him closer to exhaustion, closer to the edge. He had no reinforcements, no backup, just Clay, his rifle, and his resolve. The officer's voice cut through the chaos. "Bring him down. Don't let him warn anyone else." The cowboy gritted his teeth, realizing the danger had escalated beyond his worst fears. The officer had recognized the tactic and was coordinating his men. The soldiers began moving systematically, closing the circle, herding the Apaches into tighter spaces. From the ridge, the cowboy could see the flash of torches near the creek. Some of the fleeing group had reached the water, but others were struggling, slowed by the rough terrain or injured. He fired, signaling to them, guiding their path as best he could from above. Then he heard a cry, a woman's scream from deep within the canyon. His heart sank. It was a signal that something had gone wrong. Another soldier had broken through the rocks, cutting off a portion of the fleeing group. He leaped to Clay's back, racing down the ridge, rifle in hand, to intercept. The horse bounded over rocks and crevices, muscles straining with every leap. Dust swirled around them, catching the moonlight, blurring the shapes of friend and foe. The canyon was alive with movement, shouts, and the sound of metal striking stone. The woman had paused, watching the unfolding chaos. Her dark eyes met his from the shadows, and in that brief moment, unspoken fear and determination passed between them. They knew what was coming. The soldiers were closing in, their numbers overwhelming. There was no turning back, no chance for retreat. The air grew thick with tension, every breath sharp, every heartbeat a drum of warning. The cowboy raised his rifle, ready to fire, his mind racing with calculations. Every move, every shot, every decision mattered now. One wrong step, one miscalculation, and the lives of the children, the elders, and the brave warriors depended on him. From the ridge above, the canyon seemed endless, a labyrinth of rock and shadow. The soldiers were advancing, persistent, relentless, their discipline clear, and yet, in the chaos, the Apaches moved with the cunning of the land itself, disappearing into hidden paths, their fate hanging on the edge of chance. The cowboy tightened his grip on the rifle. Clay snorted and shifted under him, sensing the danger. Bullets hissed past, striking rock and dirt. He could see the officer coordinating the men, pushing them forward, and he knew that this confrontation was reaching its peak. He glanced toward the woman one last time. She was crouched, arrow nocked, eyes fierce, ready to strike, ready to lead her people through the shadows. The wind carried the sounds of the soldiers, the crack of rifles, the shouts of the fleeing, and the distant cries of the injured. And then the world seemed to hold its breath. The climax, the moment where survival, courage, and fate would collide, was about to unfold. The cowboy, the woman, and the hidden families were on the brink. The next few minutes could change everything. All that remained was to act and pray that the desert, the land they knew, and the courage in their hearts would see them through. The first charge began, the earth trembling under the weight of hooves and the roar of men. The final battle for survival was only just beginning. The canyon erupted in chaos as the soldiers charged, their boots pounding the hard earth, rifles raised, shouts echoing off the rock walls. The cowboy pressed low against a boulder, Clay snorting beside him, muscles coiled, ready to leap at a moment's notice. Bullets ricocheted around them, kicking up clouds of dust. But he stayed steady, picking off targets with careful, deliberate shots, slowing the soldiers enough for the fleeing Apaches to gain distance. The woman, crouched behind another rock, loosed arrows with precision. Her brother, though wounded, fought with the strength of desperation, protecting those who could not defend themselves. Each flash of fire from rifles or arrow tip lit the canyon briefly, revealing shadows darting between rocks. For a moment, the cowboy felt as if time had stopped, the world reduced to dust, blood, and the relentless rhythm of survival. Then a shift came. The soldiers, overextended and disoriented in the maze-like canyon, began to falter. The Apaches, led by the woman, disappeared into hidden paths and narrow crevices the army could not follow. One by one, the soldiers stumbled into traps or found themselves trapped by natural barriers. The canyon, once an open battlefield, had become a labyrinth favoring the defenders. The cowboy seized the opportunity. He fired, shouting to guide the family still moving toward safety. "This way. Keep going to the creek." His voice carried over the chaos, a lifeline of sound amidst the storm of gunfire. The woman's group emerged at the creek, the cool water reflecting the moonlight. Children and elders stumbled toward it, exhausted but alive. She turned back briefly, eyes meeting his, and he could see the relief and determination mirrored there. He gave her a small nod. No words were needed. The families would survive because of courage, because of the choices they had made, and because the land itself had lent them cover. The soldiers regrouped, but the canyon was no longer favorable for them. They were forced to retreat, realizing that pressing further would only cost more men. The officer on horseback cursed under his breath, eyes scanning the shadows, but the Apaches had vanished from sight. The cowboy stayed on the ridge a moment longer, ensuring no one was left behind, then slid down toward the creek, where the woman and her brother waited. The reunion was quiet, but profound. She handed him a small leather pouch filled with herbs and beads, a traditional gift of gratitude and respect. "For your courage," she said softly. "For what you risked." He accepted it, feeling the weight of the gesture more than the gift itself. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "We did what had to be done." Her brother, still leaning on a nearby rock, gave a nod of approval. "You have our respect," he said simply. "And in our world, respect is more valuable than any gold or silver." The remaining Apaches moved deeper into the hills, following the hidden paths the woman had scouted. The children clung to their parents, exhausted but safe. The elders whispered prayers of thanks, their voices carrying through the night air. The cowboy stayed behind only long enough to see that they were truly out of harm's way, then mounted Clay once more, watching the valley and the distant retreating soldiers. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe. The danger was not entirely gone. The soldiers would return, and the West was never truly safe. But for now, the lives of those he had sworn to protect were intact. The woman approached him, her arm still bound but steady, the faintest trace of a smile on her lips. "You've changed our fate tonight," she said. "Not just mine, but everyone here." "And you changed mine," he said, looking into her eyes. "I rode out alone, thinking it was just about doing the right thing. I didn't realize how much it would mean, for me and for them." She nodded, understanding. "Sometimes courage is not about fighting. Sometimes it is about knowing when to stand and when to guide others to safety. You gave us that chance." The first hints of dawn began to lighten the horizon. The sky burned gold and crimson over the desert, a reminder that life would go on, no matter the struggles that had come before. The cowboy and the woman watched in silence as the shadows of the night faded, leaving only the quiet strength of the land. "Will you stay?" she asked, her voice low. He shook his head slowly. "I can't. The West? It's still my path to walk alone, at least for now. But I'll always remember this night and the people I rode for." She studied him for a long moment, then smiled faintly. "Perhaps our paths will cross again," she said. "The land is wide, but fate has its ways." He nodded, tipping his hat in acknowledgement. Clay shifted beneath him, ready to move. With one last glance at the creek and the hills beyond, he urged the horse forward, leaving the hidden canyon behind. The sun broke fully over the desert, warming the sand, casting long shadows from the cliffs and painting the sky with colors of hope. The woman and her brother led their people onward, deeper into the desert, towards safety and a future that would no longer be immediately threatened. They carried with them the memory of a night where courage, trust, and quick thinking had preserved their lives. The children would grow up knowing the story of the cowboy who had given a horse, and more importantly, given a chance. As the cowboy rode through the rising sun, he thought of the quiet moments in the canyon, the fear, the adrenaline, and the unspoken bonds formed in the shadows of danger. He realized that life in the West was more than survival. It was about choices, about compassion, and about moments when a single act of kindness could ripple far beyond what a man could see. He passed through the scrublands, feeling the wind against his face and the warmth of the morning sun on his back. Each step of Clay's hooves carried him forward, but also carried the memory of the night's battle, the faces of the people he had protected, and the understanding that courage was a thread, connecting all of them, no matter the distance or the difference in worlds. When he finally reached a rise overlooking a quiet valley, he paused. The land stretched endlessly before him, filled with beauty and danger alike. He thought of the soldiers, now retreating, and of the Apaches, moving unseen through hidden paths. Both sides would remember the night, each interpreting it in their own way, but he knew the truth of it. The simple reality that one man's choice had made a difference. The woman and her people would continue their journey, surviving by their wits, their knowledge of the land, and the strength of their bonds. He would continue his path across the West, carrying the story silently in his heart. The desert was wide, the sun relentless, but for the first time in a long while he felt a sense of balance. Justice and mercy had walked hand in hand that night. He reined Clay to a stop near a small arroyo and dismounted. The wind carried the faint smell of sage and dust, familiar and grounding. For a moment he closed his eyes, listening to the land, its silence, its whispers, its eternal resilience. Out here every life mattered, and every choice had weight. He had learned that courage was not loud. It was quiet, steady, and enduring. As he mounted again and rode toward the horizon, he glanced back once more. The sun now fully illuminated the canyon, revealing paths, rocks, and shadows that had been hidden in darkness. It was a new day, a fresh start. He knew he had changed lives that night, and in turn he had changed himself. The West was still wild, still dangerous, but it was also alive with possibility. The story of that night would linger in memory, the night a cowboy gave his horse, the night courage and compassion held back the tide of violence, the night trust bridged a gap between two worlds, and as the cowboy disappeared into the distance, dust rising behind him like a ghostly trail, the desert seemed to sigh, carrying the quiet truth that even in a land so harsh, humanity could find a way to endure. He rode on, Clay's hooves steady on the trail, the sun warming his back, the wind whispering through the sage. The Apaches had survived, their trust earned, their lives preserved. And the cowboy, quiet, weathered, and steadfast, continued his journey, knowing that sometimes the greatest victories were not measured by battles won, but by lives saved, and the courage to choose mercy when it was hardest to give. The desert stretched before him, endless and untamed, yet filled with a promise that life, no matter how fragile, could prevail. The canyon behind him remained silent now, a witness to bravery, sacrifice, and the bonds forged in a night of peril. And as the cowboy rode into the open land, he carried with him a truth that would stay forever etched in the West. That courage, compassion, and respect could carve a path through even the harshest of places, leaving a legacy far stronger than any battle or gunfire ever could. The story had ended where it began, in the open desert, but the echoes of that night would travel far, whispered on the wind, remembered in quiet corners, and carried forward by those who had survived to tell it. And in that truth, the cowboy finally found the peace that had eluded him for so long. The West remained wild, yes, but it was also alive with hope, and sometimes that was enough.